You're now listening to Smart People You Meet at Parties, a podcast from Entrepreneur First, the world's leading talent investor. My name is Bernadette. I'm the General Manager of Entrepreneur First Singapore, and I'm privileged to speak with some of the sharpest minds in Southeast Asia's startup ecosystem. This podcast gives you a behind-the-scenes listen into the everyday conversations we have at EF with founders, investors, and thought leaders in deep tech. Today, we're joined by Paul Santos. Paul is the managing partner at Wavemaker Partners and a serial entrepreneur himself. Wavemaker is Southeast Asia's go-to seed stage venture capital firm for enterprise and deep tech businesses. It has made over 100 investments in this space. Paul has been a great friend to the Entrepreneur First community here in Singapore, having made over 10 investments in our companies so far. In this episode, Paul shares how the role of a founder evolves as startups scale, why Southeast Asia is ripe for disruption, and the contrarian bet he makes on deep tech. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Hey everyone, welcome to our now 5th episode of Spy Maps, Smart People You Meet at Parties. My name is Bernadette, and I'm very happy to be joined by Paul Santos, who is the Managing Director of Wavemaker Partners here in Singapore. Paul, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
So Paul, maybe you can share a little bit about an introduction to yourself and Wavemaker for our guests who haven't met you before.
Sure. So I lead the Southeast Asia practice for Wavemaker. So we're an early stage venture firm. We focus primarily on enterprise and deep tech. And when I say focus, I mean it. We've done over 120 investments in the region since 2012, and more than 100 of them have been in enterprise and deep tech. So I don't know that anybody's bet that hard. Our second fund, our last fund was about 66.5 million. Again, it was already the largest seed fund focused on enterprise and deep tech in the region, and we're fingers crossed about to close our third fund. And we should hit our target of 100, hopefully exceed it a bit. And we hope to do more. And so that's just sort of the firm. Prior to starting Wavemaker, I was an entrepreneur, nowhere near tech. I did a digital database marketing company, and then I had a call center serving the US market from the Philippines. My early angel investments were all non-tech. I have a high-end pest control business, high-end spirits distribution business, and air cargo index. And my wife, I helped her set up an autism development center. It's more of a social enterprise. So I guess I've had my 10,000 hours in and around entrepreneurship, and I enjoy the journey. And it's been a fun ride for me so far, being able to work with all of these founders as a VC.
Nice. Paul, you've invested in over 10 of our EF companies throughout the years, and you're a great friend to EF here locally in the region. Curious to hear your perspective on this. What comes first, a good founder or a good idea?
Okay, yeah. So ultimately, you'd have to say it's a good founding team, right? If a good founding team starts off with a not so good idea, I mean, by definition, if they're really good, they'll figure it out and they'll be able to pivot. Mm-hmm. If you have a golden opportunity and you give it to a not so good team, there are just so many things you're doing when you're executing that you could miss that opportunity. So yeah, you'd have to say team before the idea.
You're a multiple exited founder, and I think for those on the call who don't know, Paul's founded 6 companies, if I'm not mistaken, Paul, and exited 3 of them. How did you start thinking about your founding teams, having done it so many times so well?
Yeah, and I have to say, trial and error. I'm old, so we didn't have all of these podcasts or or articles, we had books. And there weren't too many sort of entrepreneurship books. So you typically would just start with who you know. And, you know, some people will say never do business with friends. Some people will say it's okay if you know how to be professional. I've done a combination. Uh, and yeah, hopefully I've gotten better over time. But you know, I've had my share of falling out with partners. It's not a fun thing. Ideally, okay. So if I look back, let me try to talk about the for real, maybe underrated stuff. Like chemistry, I think is underrated, but I think it's for real, right? Like I think if you genuinely trust and respect your partners, you'll figure that out, right? And you, some of it is you can try and see if you can make it work to a certain extent. But for me, the best, at least, you know, yeah, the best ventures I've been on have been marked by that there was a mutual trust and respect around with the partners, and you sort of appreciated how they're different from you. You don't have to be totally the same.
Yeah.
Maybe in your values, maybe in your vision for the business. But when those aren't aligned, and it's harder.
What would you say?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No. So it's really, you know, the mutual trust and respect leads to a natural chemistry, I guess, is sort of how I would try to put that together.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, would you advise future founders, one way or another, whether it is better to start with friends, or whether it's better to start with people who have complementary skill sets?
Yeah, I would say the latter. It's kind of like, you know, if you take a sports analogy, maybe if you're trying to join a neighborhood league, you go with your friends. If you're gonna try to play in, you know, whatever the best leagues, then you try to find the team that will help you get there. Now, sometimes you're lucky, you're born with some of the best players, and you know, you grow up that way. But you know, probably odds aren't that way.
Yeah. You know, when we think about founders, I think there's been a little bit of a narrative, I guess, sold probably from Silicon Valley around founders being able to be CEOs and CTOs. How do you feel about that? Or, you know, you've had experience both, I guess, on both sides of that table as a founder and now as a very seasoned seed investor. How do you think about that? And when is it, if ever, the right time for a founder to step aside?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? So I would say there are three hats, right? You know, you're a founder. You have, you know, your position in the employee, which is, you know, position in the company, which means you're an employee, and then you're a shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So founder means, you know, you started it, and it's a word that, you know, is kind of sexy these days.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, all you need to do to become a founder is to register something with ACRA, for example, in Singapore. You're a founder, right?
Yeah.
It means you started a company. It means something and it doesn't mean something, right?
Yeah.
Now, your role in the company, again, when you're forming a team, you know, based on your budget, based on who's willing to join you, then you play different roles. But as the business scales, you know, this will happen for any position. The team or the players who got you from point A to point B might be, you know, might not be the same players who can take you from point B to point C.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that happens to, you know, founders as well.
Yeah.
Where your third hat um, becomes important, where you're now a shareholder and hopefully you're aligned with your investors, with your employees in the ESOP to say, you know what, there's probably somebody who can play this role better.
Yeah.
Or if I move to this, I can help the company more. And this is a tricky thing because this is a level of self-awareness. There's a level of market feedback.
Yeah.
There's a belief in yourself versus skepticism of others. There's no right or wrong answer, right? Like ultimately, you'll have to make a decision. And that's why they pay you the big bucks, right? But that's also why you can create a lot of value, or you can get in the way of the value creation, right? So I often say this, like, you know, cliches are cliche for a reason because they're right sometimes, right? So when somebody says never, never, never give up, it's right sometimes. That's why it's a cliche. At the same time, you say know when to cut your losses.
Yeah.
Is also a cliche because it's right sometimes, and it's the decision, the context, you know, the moment you make that decision that will, you know, decide if will determine if you were right or wrong with your choice. And so it's something that you never want to tell somebody they can't do something, but it's also sometimes where, you know, after trying, the results will speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's really best when the founders are the ones who say, you know what, I think it's better if I play this role. So hopefully I gave you some context with it. It's very difficult to have a cut and dry answer.
Yeah, I really like the kind of three hats that you mentioned, kind of founder, employee, and shareholder. I haven't seen it that way before. I also, you know, with my experience, haven't seen that many transitions from founder to professional CEOs. You know, in the region, I can think maybe of Property Guru. But I think of many more examples um, stateside. Do you have experiences with that happening, and how that has been managed both by the founding team and then also by investors?
So I'm in the middle of one now. I can't say which one it is, but
Sure,
I'm in
of
the
course.
middle of that conversation. In fact, I have two. Um, the easiest is when you have that conversation, as I mentioned to you, with the founder, and they recognize where the results haven't been what everybody had hoped for, right?
Right.
And, you know, what's at stake potentially is their vision, potentially is the time they've spent building the company, right? Um, I've had founders tell me, oh, you know, I really don't care about the title. I'm here for the mission. I'm here to see this product help millions of people.
Yeah.
But then when push comes to shove, they don't want to let go. Right? And in those cases, it's better for me to walk away and just say, look, this is your business. I made a bet. We had this agreement that this is what would happen, meaning we'd have this conversation at some point in time when the results don't seem to be going that way. And if you think that you're not able to get these results for some other reason, then maybe I'm not the right person to be helping you, right? That maybe we find another director who can be more helpful to you, right? So
Yeah.
that's happened. But there's, you know, the two that I'm working on right now, you know, it's not like we're pushing anybody out the door. It's a dialogue, and it's always helpful when the founders recognize it themselves.
Mm.
You know, there are these things that in our quiet moments we know anyway.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes it's we know that we can do this, people just don't see it right now and they don't believe it, and we press on. Or in our quiet moments we say, nah, I think game is up. Maybe I should, find a different seat on the bus, or exit the bus.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's sort of it. It's a tough thing. There's stigma. This is the stuff that, I want to be a founder, or we should celebrate failure, or go big or go home. All of these things, right? Like, in my mind, they're so easy to say, and then you can say it with such bravado.
Mm-hmm.
But when the moment comes, nobody's laughing, nobody's enjoying it.
Yeah.
But it's real.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you have a very collaborative approach with your founders, Paul, and your portfolio. And, I've certainly heard very, very warm feedback from the companies that we've co-invested in with you as well. I think there's this perception that investors are, can be adversarial. What do you think about that? And where do you feel that comes from?
Okay. You use the word collaborative, right? Another way I'd like to think about it is aligned. The reality is everybody is after their own self-interest, right? That's human nature. Now, to the extent that we can set up terms, to the extent that we can set up work arrangements where our interests are most aligned, then we have the best chance of working together well. We have the best chance of forming a long-term partnership. And part of that could even be leaving some stuff on the table for the other side because you genuinely believe that you're better together, right? Than on your own. So that's sort of default for me. Why it feels adversarial is when your interests aren't aligned, right? When you feel like you're on the opposite sides of things.
Yeah.
And the only time, so you certainly shouldn't get there. You certainly shouldn't be there when you start off, right? Like, if you start off and that's already your relationship, that's very tiring. I mean,
Yeah.
Building a startup is tiring enough, right? Now, if we start out aligned and somewhere along the way we're misaligned, then that's where dialogue can come in. That's where sort of mutual trust and respect can come in. And then that's where you can decide, look, so that's why I have no board seats. I'm not precious about board seats. I'm happy to stay if the founders feel like I'm still being helpful. But I'm happy to step aside if we can find somebody who can be more helpful to the founders than me personally. So that's sort of how I try to look at it. I think, it becomes adversarial when you feel the other person isn't aligned with you.
Yeah. It sounds like that's been a large part of your approach to investing. And the other part of your thesis that I find, unique in this region, Paul, as you mentioned, is the focus on deep tech. What made you decide to bet on deep tech several years ago?
Okay, so the way I say it is this, and I'm interested in entrepreneurship. That's sort of why I say my 10,000 hours, right? So I like the idea of people coming together to solve a problem and try to do it in a value-creating way that you can build something scalable, sustainable. And I've shared the range of businesses that I've been in. It really doesn't, almost doesn't matter. Now, the stuff that attracted me, frankly, to enterprise and deep tech is more often than not, they're solving a problem, right? I know even when we pitch consumer stuff, the problem I'm trying to solve is this. Like, we're trained, right? But there's a large part of consumer stuff that's, I would just describe as creating fresh, addictive delight.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's sort of what I see a lot of consumer plays are about, right? If it's not fresh, it's hard. If it's not addictive, it's not scalable. And if it's not delightful, people get bored and try something new. And just my personality is like, there's a point where that just becomes consumerism. There's a point where that just becomes mindless, or you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's just I don't know if it's a personality quirk or just a personal interest, but it it's just that. Now, when I started investing in enterprise and deep tech stuff, I also found that a lot of the VCs didn't care for them either, right? I mean, he didn't care for them. And so in the consumer stuff, you would see a lot more competition for deals, right? In the enterprise and deep tech stuff, it's not as much today. And so I get fascinated by, you know, the insights that the founders share about the industry or the technology or the problem they want to solve. I get fascinated with how they're trying to do it in this novel way that could really, you know, move the needle. And so that's part of what attracts me. And then they're usually more capital efficient. I can imagine real revenues. I can imagine profit at some point, right? Like you know, you choose what you want to imagine, right? So even in that, even in terms of building the business, it's easier also for me to imagine.
Maybe not with enterprise, Paul, but with deep tech, I guess this is the controversial opinion that sometimes we hear as well,
Sure.
and more often than not, actually, which is, when is patient capital too patient?
Okay.
And I would love your perspective on that, because you've actually done investments into this area
Yeah.
alongside Jeff and separately yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as an aside, one of my LPs, who's a successful VC himself, would tease me, right? He would say, your strategy is audacious. Right? You like to chew on the tough nuts. Right? You don't like the soft food. You like the tough nuts. So you better make sure you're good at chewing, or your digestion is really good, right? So that was sort of the side joke. And again, this is all about perspective. And the way I think about it is, all VC is patient capital. You just have to choose what you want to be patient with. I'll give you an example. In the consumer stuff, you know, you want to be, you know, excited by maybe visits to your site, or downloads, or engagement, or GMV, right? So those are the things that excite you, that keep you in the game, right? The spectacular growth across these metrics, right?
Yeah.
So what do you need to be patient with? You will need to be patient with churn, right? Because consumers are fickle.
Yeah.
Or you have competition. Because of that, you need to be patient with bad unit economics, because sometimes you don't have revenue. You're imagining the revenue to be later. It's not your priority right now, right? And then you multiply bad unit economics by spectacular growth. You need to be patient with high absolute burn. Okay? So I found I'm less patient with those three.
Okay.
Okay? Now, with deep tech, what do you need to be patient with? You need to be patient with product development. Why? Because the product you're developing has to be 10 times better than what's in the market. The product you're developing is maybe cutting edge that nobody's ever seen before. You need to be patient with that. What else do you need to be patient with? You need to be patient with sales cycle, right? Because as you're developing the product, you you have to get customers to even give you a pilot, and then they have the upper hand, and then you have to negotiate with them, and then there are multiple stakeholders, and so just trying to get through that takes time. And you need to be patient with almost no growth or slow growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you put those three together, right? Now, what's the reward for being patient with that? The reward is potentially a product that is cutting edge. And if it works, you can almost charge anything for it. Meaning, if it solves something, you already know the value you can capture. So you can imagine wonderful unit economics. And if you break through, you have a scalable, defensible business, right? And so in both cases, as an investor, you have to be patient with something.
Yeah.
So
I really like that thesis, Paul. I haven't heard it articulated that way before. It's interesting. I guess it's about trade-offs, right? What pains are you willing to bear? What sacrifices are you willing to make?
there's no perfect deal, right? Like every deal is risk and reward. Every deal is valuation and structure, right? And so it's just choosing where you want to play. Now, I wouldn't try this at home if you don't have the stomach for it, or it. I was talking to one founder who was teasing me, saying, "Paul, I know fundraising for my company was hard, but how the hell do you sell an enterprise and deep tech fund for Southeast Asia?"
I mean, it's a good question, Paul. How are you thinking about doing that?
And saying, you need a little luck. You need to find some LPs who don't think you're too crazy. You need to find some founders who make you look good. But it was a slug. It still is.
Yeah. Well, this is third time lucky for you. So it seems like there's increasingly. I love your perspective on this actually in the last minute or two. What are you most optimistic and pessimistic about for our region? Especially given that we're now all living in the midst of a global pandemic. I think against that backdrop.
Yeah. So in some sense, I try not to get too carried away with things, good or bad. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, we'll have our moments of sheer emotion, whether good or bad. And I typically have a time limit. Okay, you can stop feeling so good about yourselves already. Let's move on to the next topic. Or, you can not sort of mope around for too long already. Let life goes on, right? So that's sort of my default. I love this book. It's a classic by Peter Drucker, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And for him, the basis for any innovation is change. And as long as things are changing, there's an opportunity to innovate. And if you think about Silicon Valley, for example, it's in the US, right? If you think about where the US is, in some sense, you can say there's still a lot of change, but in some sense, population growth is kind of stable, the economy is already kind of developed and stable, the growth rate's kind of stable. It's fairly stable ground, right? If you think about Southeast Asia then, if you think about the rate of growth of the population, the rate of growth of the economy, the adoption of technology, all of these people coming to the region, like, it's a massive change, right? And if you imagine that, then it's kind of like the ground is shaking. Mm-hmm. And so it's easier to knock off people when the ground is shaking because they're not as stable. Now, the US has proven that, Silicon Valley has proven over and over again that even when the ground is stable, because these guys are just so big and slow, you can still disrupt them. Mm-hmm. And so the reason I'm excited about our region is the ground is shaking.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of one side of it. And the other side of it is, when you invest in something, it's where the base is. The lower the base, the easier it is to multiply, right? Like it's easier to turn $1 into $2 than $1 billion into $2 billion.
Right.
Right. And so while some people will be saying that, it's still too early, maybe it's scary, as an early stage, maybe overly optimistic in VC entrepreneur, I'm saying, this is the best time, right? And so with COVID, what's COVID gonna do? I think there's a few things. So what's the new normal anyway? Right? Like it's a phrase that's brandished around. Like, what the hell does it mean? And so for me, I distill it into two things. So the first thing is, the new normal is things that we've tried that maybe we didn't pay attention to before, or maybe we didn't really want to do before, maybe we were just forced to do now. There were these things that COVID forced us to do that we will decide after this that, that wasn't so bad. Or that's good. Or I didn't think that was possible, but it's actually possible. And there will be these few things that will stay with us even after. And then the other side will be whatever regulations, right? So, and I will relate that to, okay, have they found a vaccine or some other cure? How are we going to manage? And that's going to be part of the new normal. Like kind of like after 9/11, everybody got used to all of this screening that we need to do at airports now. And we just take it as well, is because of what happened. And so if I were to distill it to just two main ideas, I'm sure there are more, but those are the two main ones for me. And those two will create change. Those two will create opportunities. And so with the ground shaking in Southeast Asia, low base, add a few more opportunities, a few more changes in there, just gives me that then there's just more opportunities.
Paul, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for being our guest on SpyMaps today. We have 20 plus founders who are really excited to chat with you now. So we're going to let them into the virtual room. But thank you so much for your time. I know they've got a lot of questions for you. So get ready.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode and are interested in founding your own company, apply via joinef.com. We'll help you find a co-founder, develop an idea, and launch your company from scratch. And most of all, we'll invest in you from day one. Applications are now open for our cohorts in Singapore, Bangalore, London, Paris, Berlin, and Toronto. To listen to more episodes of SpyMaps, visit joinef.com. Thanks for listening.